The Legend of Zelda is hands down my favorite game franchise of all time, and who could blame me? Getting to adventure in a mystical world full of unique and interesting races and characters, getting to save a world that's beyond belief, and in many cases experiencing a great story to boot. Well, okay, maybe that last one is maybe pushing it a bit, but regardless, I still love Zelda. And I mean, I really love Zelda. And Breath of the Wild is a near perfect example of not only what a great Zelda could be, but also why open world games are so appealing to me. Notice how I say near perfect. I'll be reviewing Breath of the Wild in the coming weeks, so I won't go into too much detail about this for now, but for this video, I'll go ahead and say this. Breath of the Wild is an experience, a flawed masterpiece. Now, like I said, the purpose of this video isn't to review Breath of the Wild, but rather, as you could probably tell from the title, is a list of things that I, as a fan, would like to see happen in future installments. In no particular order, these are the things I'd like to see in the next Zelda. Now, the first thing I want to talk about may trigger some people, but a huge problem I and many other people that have reviewed Breath of the Wild have is Link. Guys, Link is fucking boring. It wasn't something that bothered me until Angry Joe pointed it out in his angry review of Breath of the Wild, and since then, in subsequent playthroughs, this issue has become more apparent to me. Link has famously been rather boring, always being a sort of blank slate for players to project themselves onto. However, in this current climate of gaming, this kind of character is inherently problematic and boring. We live in an environment where we have characters like Dad of War's Kratos, Lost Boy with Mushroom Zambi's Joel, Spider-Man's Peter Parker, and so many other characters that I couldn't possibly list them all here. Characters that are meant to be the link between the game and the player are outdated and boring. We live in a more story-driven environment, and the only games that have characters like Link are games like Fallout and Elder Scrolls, and basically every MMORPG in existence. So here's my proposal. Either make Link talk and have a personality, or let us create our own characters. Let's talk about the former first, because it's the one area that I feel Breath of the Wild actually regressed from its predecessor, Skyward Sword. In Skyward Sword, Link had a very clear and defined personality from the various dialogue options the player could choose from. Additionally, Link was undeniably more expressive and emotional than any other title in the franchise. You could really feel the desperation in Link as he watched Zelda seal herself to seal the imprisoned. Wow, that was a mouthful. Link wasn't just the link between the player and the game, he was an entity all of his own, with his own goals and motivation. It's the one area of the game that everyone has been able to agree was great. So why the hell is Link so emotionless and boring in Breath of the Wild? Even when there are dialogue choices, they usually lead to the same result. Even when they don't, the other choices usually just ends the conversation entirely. I want Nintendo to go back to Skyward Sword and give the next Link a personality. And if they aren't going to do that, if they're stuck on this idea that the playable character has to be the link between the game and the player, then adopt the Bethesda approach and let us make our own characters. Give us a character creation tool complete with options from all of Zelda's races. Imagine being able to play as a Goron or fly as a Rito. And if you're worried about the implications this would have on the lore, I would like to remind you that the spirit of the hero, the thing connecting all of the game's links, doesn't say that the chosen hero has to be Hylian. It could just be an unprecedented thing, like in Skyrim, where your character is born as, say, Azora, and inherits the spirit of the hero, making them the goddess's chosen hero. You could have people be all, why was the chosen hero not born Hylian, like many NPCs do in Skyrim when the player picks any race other than a Nord.
Who are you? 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 Who are you
Next, I want to talk about the story. Again, Breath of the Wild story disappointed me on my first playthrough. It felt like I was playing catch-up on the events that happened far before I actually started playing. All of the most interesting stuff had already happened, and I was just cleaning up the mess. But it was my most recent playthroughs that I discovered something. I was strangely invested in a story that I had already beaten thrice before. I found myself raising an eyebrow at myself. I thought, I was so disappointed at first. Why am I so invested in this story all of a sudden? When I thought about it for a couple of days, I came to the realization that I already knew how the story would pan out. So I unconsciously focused on things I hadn't really paid attention to before. Suddenly there were a whole gaggle of characters that were far more interesting than I realized on my first playthrough. Characters like Prince Sidon and Chief Riju of the Gerudo. Characters like them were far more compelling than I originally thought, and I began to pay closer attention to the personalities and motivations of these characters as a result. Characters that were once disappointing to me were now compelling and interesting. I found myself caring about them far more than I originally did. However, that really only distracts from the issue of playing catch-up in the story like we do. The story may be more interesting than I originally perceived, but it still doesn't change the fact that the majority of the game's plot is told almost entirely through flashbacks. So I want the next game to go for a more direct story this time around. While I definitely think the game should absolutely keep to its open nature, I don't think that it should detract from the quality of the story. A simple solution would be to have the game sectioned off into areas the player can explore in any order, and have self-contained story within them. Breath of the Wild kind of does this, but it's a bit half-hearted in doing so. I definitely want Nintendo to focus more on stories in these areas. To summarize, I don't think open-ended gameplay and compelling stories are mutually exclusive. Next, let's talk dungeons, or Breath of the Wild's lack thereof. While I agree that the 3 starting dungeons and 7 dungeons after needs to be done away with, getting rid of dungeons entirely was not the way to go. And yes, I genuinely think that the Divine Beasts are not really dungeons. The Divine Beasts are half-assed minimum effort asset reusing messes. While it's cool to be able to control them from within, that really only amounts to solving a few simple puzzles. With hardly anything populating these areas of the game, such as chests or enemies, the Divine Beasts felt empty and unfinished. So, I'd like Nintendo to go back to more traditional dungeons. Again, the 3 dungeons has to end, but I want to see more actual dungeons take the place of the Divine Beasts. People remember the Ancient Cistern, or the Forest Temple, or Snow Peak Ruins because they were memorable. Perhaps they subverted our expectations on what a particular dungeon was like, think the Water Temple and the Ancient Cistern, or had an element that was unique, such as the Forest Temple. This kind of goes back to the story, but perhaps these dungeons could be involved in each area's story in some way, like ghosts from an ancient mansion kidnapping children at night or something. However, more than anything, I want to see actual dungeons that are completely optional. While I like shrines, and I still believe that they still have a place in Zelda, I would like to see larger scale dungeons that are in no way required to explore and complete, but give exponential rewards for doing so. Maybe make these smaller than the story dungeons, but bigger than shrines.
However, the princess survived to face Ganon alone.
Link, you are our final hope.
Next, and I can't stress this enough, don't make Ganon the main bad guy. Better yet, make him, not necessarily a good guy, but maybe make him a relatable anti-hero, someone who just wants what's best for his people, the Gerudo. Even better yet, make the Hyrulean royal family the bad guys. Show a darker side to Hyrule. Show the royal family being overtly racist. Show the king being a dictator. You don't have to make Zelda herself evil, but make the royal family the bad guys. We know racism exists within Zelda. I mean, just look at the Gerudo who are painted as thieves and murderers. Again, it would tell a more adult story and subvert the conventions of Zelda, that being that Hyrule good, everywhere else bad. In almost every game, Hyrule is painted as a can-do-no-wrong near utopia that is the center of the universe. We know, however, that this isn't actually the case, as sources like Hyrule Historia show Hyrule in some pretty negative light sometimes. It wouldn't feel out of place at all if Hyrule was the bad guy this time around, and would honestly be a nice break from the norm. Lastly, I want to talk about side content. While it was nice that everything you found was tangible to you as the player, the things you found when exploring really only amounted to finding either a Korok seed or a shrine. So I'd like to see more variety with things you could find, and more worthwhile and meaningful side quests. I'd love to see entire subplots from these quests, with the same level of quality as something akin to the College of Winterhold from Skyrim. Of course, not every side quest has to be like this, but it would be great to have a few at least. And that's all I can think of for now. I'm sure I'll think of more later on, so maybe I'll do something like a little mini-series, something along the lines of even more things Zelda can do in the next game, or something like that. Until then, I'd like this to be the start of a discussion. What do you guys want to see in the next game? Which is your favorite Zelda? Mine's Wind Waker, just throwing that out there. Which is your least favorite? Your favorite characters? Do you think Breath of the Wild is a perfect masterpiece, or is it a flawed experience? Let me know in the comments below, and if you liked what you saw here, then I would like to present you with the subscribed invitation. You can RSVP to it by clicking on that little red icon below the video, and there's that little like button next to it if you want to click that as well. And be sure to like my Facebook and Twitter, where I engage in discussions and post updates about the next video. And be sure to follow my Twitch channel, where I stream every Tuesday and Saturday from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Central Time. Links in the description below. You guys are awesome. This has been McDurpolds, signing out.